All right, and next up is Raphael Stern. He's a professor of civil, environmental, and geoengineering at the University of Minnesota.
Thank you. I think I just, I'll just keep going. Exactly, there we go. Perfect, one more. All right, well, thank you very much. Happy to be here. Associate Professor in Civil, Environmental, and Geoengineering at the University of Minnesota. Talking today about my CCAT-funded project. This is a joint project with myself and my colleague, Professor Ziran Wang at Purdue University, and this is supporting two graduate students, so Yupeng Zhou at Purdue and my student Ariane Zare at the University of Minnesota. And the idea behind the project, this is also, like the first one, a project that just started. I think we officially got authorization somewhere in December to start, or maybe it was a little before that, but it was certainly, it seems like just a few days ago. This is certainly still a work in progress, but I'm happy to sort of give an update of what we've done so far and maybe pitch the vision of what we want to do with the time that we have left on this project. The basic idea is, can we bridge the gap between theory and implementation for CAV-based traffic smoothing? We'll go over what I'm talking about in traffic smoothing in a little bit, but the idea has been around for a while, and yet I haven't seen anyone actually do anything with it beyond maybe a couple of experiments, a couple demonstrations. And our question was really sort of, to some extent, what gives? Where's the mismatch? And how can we maybe try to either identify controllers that are compatible with actual autonomous vehicles or develop controllers that are compatible with actual autonomous vehicles. And so the reason I'm working with Professor Wang at Purdue is he has an autonomous vehicle that we can run these things on. Not going to talk about that part of the project as much today, but I'll give you an update on some experimental testing that's planned very soon. So, big picture, I'm a civil engineer. I love and hate traffic. And I particularly love traffic that to some extent occurs for no reason. So in the wild here on the left-hand side, we can see a traffic wave that's emerging, right, traveling upstream. It's unclear, there's no construction, no crash or anything like that. So it's kind of unclear what's going on. And it turns out, to skip a couple decades of math here, that this was a long-standing debate actually in the civil engineering community of what's causing this, until a bunch of researchers in Japan about 25 years ago now conducted an experiment where they created pure car following. So pure traffic, no external bottlenecks, right? This is effectively an infinite loop of traffic. Every vehicle has a vehicle in front of it, the vehicle behind it. And it turns out these traffic, so I think the video has perhaps restarted, and you can see everyone starts at roughly uniform speed and spacing, and then somebody makes a small mistake. And that small mistake is then amplified by the vehicle behind it and amplified by the vehicle behind it until relatively soon you have a full-blown stop-and-go wave with some vehicles at a complete standstill and other vehicles racing to catch up to the vehicle in front. And this is due to a concept called string instability. The basic idea is that small perturbations from the flow, so from an equilibrium flow, are amplified. And you can see this, so this is, we can see this in the wild here. You can see this in an experiment. This is some recent data off of a test bed outside of Nashville, Tennessee on I-24, where they set up cameras on a 4-mile stretch of an interstate and basically can get vehicle trajectories for every single vehicle across 4 lanes of travel. So this is from 6 a.m. to 9:30 a.m., so 3.5 hours of traffic. You can see once the traffic hits a certain density there, I don't know, around 6:30 a.m., these things are inevitable. There's no construction on this highway. There are crashes that occur as a result of these waves. But there's no construction, there's no fundamental reason beyond the fact that human drivers are string unstable and they overreact. And that's okay, they're generally relatively safe, but it's inefficient from a traffic flow perspective. So I've been occupied with this for the last 15 years or something like that, thinking about this. And I've done quite a bit with this. One of the things I did a long time ago, I just want to show you a result from, this is now, about 10 years ago, was basically tried to recreate that ring road experiment with the question of what happens when we start to switch out some vehicles for automation. Don't want to focus on this too much, but it is kind of the motivation for the rest of the work. And it turns out that that vehicle with the arrow on top, the bottom you get the speeds, the vehicle with the arrow on top is autonomous capable, and once that arrow turns to red, it's now running autonomously, and you see much improved traffic. So out of 22 vehicles on the track, one of them, so let's call it about 5% of the vehicles, are driving differently, driving better, actively trying to smooth the flow of traffic. And the effect is very effective smoothing of the flow of traffic. Everyone benefits. Everyone goes a little faster, not a lot faster, 10 or 15% faster, a little more throughput. The huge difference is in things like fuel economy, where people see 20, 30, maybe even 40% savings compared to that highly oscillatory flow. All right, so that is the basic idea. And with the advent of autonomous vehicles, this is possible. We now have more and more vehicles with more and more autonomous capabilities on the roads. All I'm using here is the longitudinal control, right? So the speed control. So effectively, vehicles with some level of adaptive cruise control could be doing this. However, correct me if I'm wrong, no one is. And that's the real motivation here. So we can change the driving behavior of some vehicles. With autonomy, we can do this very effectively to smooth traffic. And if you look at the literature as an academic, you will see dozens of papers published over the last 10 years or so that do exactly what I showed in that video, right? We smooth traffic with different controllers, different techniques. Everyone shows it on their benchmark example. And it works great on their example of their, in this traffic flow, there's no standard test case. And there's no one who really says, well, how do we know which one actually works well? And then there's a whole other component of they all sort of assume you have sort of perfect information and you have a really good estimate of what that equilibrium speed ought to be. Some people assume connectivity for this, some people don't. Obviously with connectivity, you can do more things if you know how fast the other cars around you are going. But at the end of the day, no one really talks about, okay, how do we actually get this on a car? And is it feasible? Can the cars actually do this? That's the second part that Professor Wang, that Ziran's working on at Purdue, is the how do we integrate it on the car. I'm going to talk less about that, but I want to talk about some preliminary results we have now from trying to identify sort of how do these different these traffic flow smoothers stack up against each other, and what's missing between sort of the theory and the reality. All right, so the main question is sort of what are those gaps between theory and reality, and how do these stack up against each other? We've started by basically scouring the literature, finding every method that we can that somebody's published that says this works relatively well. And then we've built a microsimulation environment. So for now, we're still doing this in simulation. More on field testing in just a moment. And then we can compare them. So we're comparing both traffic smoothing algorithms as well as estimation algorithms to estimate what that equilibrium flow speed ought to be. So all of this rests on microscopic traffic simulation. So we're modeling the speed, acceleration, spacing of individual vehicles, position of individual vehicles using ordinary differential equations. There's decades of research that we can draw on here, so we can get relatively good models for what traffic flow looks like, human drivers look like, et cetera. And they all sort of follow this acceleration up in the right-hand corner. Acceleration is some function of the current traffic state, or the vehicle state. The speed, the spacing, the speed, and the relative speed. Are you catching up to or falling behind the vehicle in front of you? And if you look at most of these traffic smoothing algorithms, most of them assume, okay, we're going to drive sort of like a human driver with an additional component, an additional control input that we're going to put in to smooth that flow. That's the goal. And how you select that U is sort of the special sauce that every paper has a different method that they propose, and that's part of what we want to evaluate. So not going to walk through the details of how all these work, but here's just a sampling of 4 of them. There's nonlinear controllers. There's sort of PI type, so proportional integral type controllers. There's more ad hoc controllers that people have sort of hacked together with different methods. All of these do seem to work, at least in some cases, right? Everyone publishes with a paper where they work, at least in their test case. The question is, how well do they perform across multiple test cases? The other component then is all of them require some sort of input information of some notion of like what's the equilibrium speed, or how fast ought we to be driving to be like what's the optimal speed to be going at. And there's a whole bunch of different methods that people have proposed for estimating that based on the current flow conditions. Again, if you have connectivity, you might have information from further ahead on the road, sort of what traffic wave is about to hit you. If you don't have connectivity, there's methods that try to sort of estimate that based on your speed over the last couple of seconds or over the last couple of minutes. So we have a whole bunch of different methods here as well. Here's a couple more. Again, with connectivity, you expect better performance, but you also, there's some sort of connectivity has to either be mandated or OEMs have to choose to do it. And so there's a trade-off there. All right, how are we going to test these? Preliminarily, what I want to share with you is just some basic platoon simulations. So we basically have a string of cars. We take real-world data for what that lead vehicle does. That gives us some speed profile where the car speeds up, slows down. We simulate what a couple of human drivers would, what they would experience, and then how they would drive based on that. And then we put a autonomous vehicle in there that's actively smoothing with different smoothers and different equilibrium speed estimation algorithms, and then we see sort of what signal that vehicle kind of propagates back. And I hope you can see these. I hope you can see those. So basically, different controllers perform differently. I've got a summary slide here in just a second that shows how they actually compare. But the big picture is, depending on which controller you have and depending on which estimation method you have, your mileage will vary. So if you look at performance across different, so we've got 4 different controllers that I'm nonlinear controller, PI, this follower stopper, which is kind of hacked together, and then a simple proportional controller. If you have all human drivers on the left, that's that wave amplification that you see. You see about, what is that? About nearly 8–10% wave amplification through this small platoon. And then if you have different controllers work differently well in terms of being able to reduce that. The different colors correspond to different estimation methods. And so across this particular example here, I would say that this proportional controller or the follower stopper are the ones that seem to perform best. All right, so where are we going with this? Again, this is all very preliminary, but I hope it gives the flavor of what our goal is here. I'm headed to Purdue a week from yesterday, a week from last Wednesday. So next week, where we're currently working on implementing this on their test vehicle, and then running a couple of small experiments. They've got a test track down by Columbus, Indiana, about 2 hours south of West Lafayette. Which is an old airport that's shared with Cummins, the diesel manufacturer, where we can do some testing. And so we're going to be implementing these different controllers on the actual vehicle and then go sort of, again, towards that goal of bridging that gap between the simulation and actual implementation. Okay, so the key findings here, both the wave smoothing controller and more importantly, your method of estimating the appropriate speed actually matters. Some of these perform better than others, and hopefully we'll be able to propose a more rigorous way to test these across a whole bunch, across a sort of a standardized set of test cases. We have ongoing research, and hopefully next year maybe. But if you reach out to me next week, perhaps even, I'll have some updates of how this actually works when you implement this on a vehicle. Thanks again to CCAT for supporting this research, and thank you for your attention. I think I have a couple minutes, perhaps, if there's any questions. Thank you.
Hi, it's a very interesting topic, and I'm a PhD student also in Purdue.
Oh, great.
And yeah, so I'm curious about the real implementation. You know that there is a big gap from the simulation to the real world. I'm wondering how the performance of your real implementation. Do you encounter some problems when you use your algorithm to the real? Like if you optimize the acceleration, there is no gap between the acceleration and the acceleration torque of the vehicle and the drag force or something.
Yeah. Thanks. This is an excellent question. And I'm going to, before I bury the lead here, I don't have an answer. Okay. But it's an excellent question. And that's because this is exactly the point here, is that when almost all the results I've seen are in simulation. And in simulation, I can get my car, I want a certain acceleration, I can get my car in simulation to perfectly execute that. In reality though, from the high level controller that picks a speed or picks an acceleration to, rubber hitting the pavement, there's a whole bunch of nonlinearities that occur between the engine, the transmission. It depends on what kind of drivetrain you're dealing with. And in a hybrid, you're dealing with some additional switching logic between different drivetrains. So there's a whole bunch of nonlinearities. And that's exactly the question that we're sort of trying to address with the second half. So the first half that I've presented on here so far is sort of, in theory, which controllers are best. And then that second part where we're starting the implementation next week is how does this actually translate? And if the answer is, and I'm half expecting the answer to be, it turns out that these controllers that work well in theory perhaps are garbage and to be clear, I've published some of these controllers, and I'm willing to say, I'm guessing that many of the ones that we've published are garbage when it comes to actually running on a vehicle. But then the question is, how can we change them to be compliant with the vehicles? And I don't have an answer for that yet, but hopefully next year I will.
Okay, thank you.
It's a great question.
I'd like to extend your question a little bit more. And if you look at the key steps, that start with sensing, and then decision making, that's algorithm, and then actuation. And at every step, there is a delay. Like, for example, sensing, sampling rate, and also post-processing. That's, takes a long time, actually. Then decision making, too, depending on what CPU you use. Then plus actuation, right? Controlling, like you mentioned, engine or maybe, motor, and that takes time, too. Yeah. So, and then that translates into a vehicle motion, and that depends on, of course, a vehicle mass, which is a very important factor, and you typically don't know, how much a vehicle weighs. So in simulations, how do you account, or is it important to account for all of these? And unless you do that, probably simulation doesn't match vehicle performance.
Yeah, great question. Great question. Exactly spot on. In fact, what I'll tell you is I don't want to stand here and pretend like string stability is something new. Automakers have been aware of this since the early 90s. I guarantee it. I've spoken with people who worked at automakers in the early 90s and talked about it. I've also rented probably about a dozen different commercial sort of level 1, ACC vehicles, tested them, and they're all string unstable. So they all know how to do this, but also, based on long conversations with a lot of these people, it's the delay that really kills them. And particularly the actuation delay, I think is, the sensing delay, if you're just dealing with something like distance, right? So we're not talking about full LiDAR distance data, but we're just talking about simple radar distance to the nearest object in front. That sensing delay is it's not zero, it's not negligible, but it's relatively small. But the actuation delay, particularly on an internal combustion engine vehicle, is large in comparison. And now we're not dealing with a simple differential equation. We're dealing with a delayed differential equation, which if you've ever dealt with it, I recommend you don't. I mean, it's really unpleasant. So in simulation right now, the answer is no. We're not taking that into account. I've done stuff with it, with the delayed system, but the delayed system, the math is just much, much uglier. But that's why I think this project to me was so exciting, was because we're doing that next step and trying it in the actual vehicle and then trying to see where that disconnect is. Because I agree, so long as sort of the academic work stays in simple simulations, we're always going to have those real world limitations like delay that will mean that the work can't actually be implemented. So not an answer, but I agree.
All right, well, please join me in thanking all of our speakers.